we shall snap our fingers next to the microphone in 3, 2, 1.
On the Shoulders of Dwarves, a weekly podcast about role-playing games. Hello and welcome to episode 39 of On the Shoulders of Dwarves, a weekly podcast about role-playing games and the gamers who game them. My name is Eran Aviram.
And my name is Uri Lifshitz. Hello.
And today we'll discuss conflict, and by that we don't mean combat. Or do we? We mean some combat as well. But combat in way too many games tend to be the only conflict that we actually sit down to resolve. The main obstacle in our way to save whatever prince or princess from whatever dragon or dragoness. It doesn't have to be the case. Conflicts are the basis for drama. Having to overcome something is one of the main things that happen in every story. Having to overcome against odds or even against yourself is one of the main things that happen in any good story. Having to decide between option A and option B when both of them have dramatic consequences. That's an important thing. Bringing change. That's what conflict is all about.
Agree. And like you said, conflict takes many forms. Now, there is a tendency in role-playing game to focus on one very specific form of conflict, like we mentioned, the decimation of our opponent via physical combat. But there are so many forms of conflict. Now, some systems have specific mechanics to resolve non-violent conflicts. Some do not. And pretty much all the others are somewhere in the middle on this spectrum. And we're here to provide some suggestions how to spice up your encounters by non-combat conflicts, or basically to add more types and variation of conflicts to your ongoing campaign, session, one-timers, etc. And I'm going to start this list of conflicts with a controversial one, and that is having no conflicts. One of the first things that every newbie improviser or GM do when they feel there isn't enough excitement is to add a conflict to create drama.
Yes.
There's a whole trope named orcs kick the door. Nothing happened in the session? Fine. Orcs kick the door. Roll initiative. Let's add drama. Let's do something. And I would say that is fine. But do not be afraid to let an encounter play out without a conflict. Imagine this scenario. The heroes are going fully armed, headstrong, to meet the old count and get him to tell them exactly what is happening. They bang on the door is opened by an elderly servant who said, "Oh, hello, would you like to come in for a glass of tea? Why don't you?" And let the heroes be surprised by that. Let the old count be this lovable old person happy to cooperate. Let them have tea and biscuits. A whole session of polite and engaging conversation is an excellent chance for character development, for world building, for ideas generation. There is so much that could happen if we allow our character to simply interact with the world in other tools other than their weapons.
We talked a lot about this sort of thing on our episode on pacing. I'll give a link in the show notes because this is exactly this. Not everything that happens in the game needs to be a point of high tension. Having some low tension, even for an entire session, even having a session of sitting back and talking and brushing your teeth or whatever, can be awesome if everyone is into it, if you just had a big fight, if whatever.
That is correct, but also bear in mind that no conflict doesn't necessarily mean happy and healthy.
Oh, okay.
You can be tired, you can disagree on things, but they could be in a civilized manner. Talking with the necromancer about why he's raising the dead, and him making good points about this being a tradition of his people, and maybe making the case that raising the dead to help the living is a noble profession. the dead have no more needs of their own, and they can help make this country into something better. Why not? Now, there's no conflict inherent in this. This is simply a conversation. But it's a very good way of, again, deepening the world around you without an actual conflict, but simply an exchange of ideas.
Excellent. Let us continue.
The next item on my list is the social conflict. I remember when I first started playing a Fate role-playing game that I was amazed by this. The fact that social conflict was handled in the same way as combat. You had rolls, you had damage, and you actually roll initiative to start a social conflict. I still remember the example I read in the beginning. It was, you want to enter the club, and the bouncer says, you cannot go in. And you have to argue with him. You can't start raising your fist, because otherwise he's going to call security and you're not going to get in, or he's going to call the police. You simply have to persuade him in one way or another to get in, and you can simply make good statement, or you can insult him to the point where he will run away crying, and you can go into the club. Now, in some gaming system, and I'm thinking Dungeon and Dragon and Pathfinder, this is usually handled with social roles. I refer to diplomacy, bluff rolls, etc. And I love the fact that in Fate and other systems, you can actually have a social brawl, a social conflict, if you will, where both you roll attack and deal damage and the opponent roll defense, etc. And the only difference is the description and the effects. A social attack can be a snide remark, a condescending glare, or even just a well-thought-out argument. And the damage can be a blushing of the cheeks, a teary eye, a gasp. Imagine a GM describing a defeat in a social conflict. Your opponent break down and begin to sob. You have won. What do you do now? Your opponent is running away from the room, or even fainting at the point from the magnitude of the insult which you have laid upon him in front of all the members of the court. Social conflict is an excellent way of both enhancing and defining difference in status, who's in charge and who isn't, and social class. And of course, once you have defeated someone in a social conflict, there is an outcome. Your social status can be elevated, or it can, really drop down. Oh my God, he said all those horrible things to the king gestures. This is a horrible person. That's a great case of winning the battle but losing the campaign.
Another great example for a system that allows for different styles of conflict, with all of them being mechanically the same but very different in fiction-wise, is Mistborn, but I want to talk about it later when we'll discuss mechanics in conflict. So let's wait until then.
If you can't wait, you can go to Eran's website. There's a review of the Mistborn role-playing game. It is amazingly long and very thorough, and I have read it all twice because I love Mistborn. You should too. Moving on to the next item on my list is make something else the field of battle. I mean, we have mentioned, I think in our first episode, like months and months ago, the better battle. It's just fun to say the better battle. How you can change the setting of the battle to make it more interesting. But I'm saying, no, forget about that. Make something else the field of battle. For example, imagine the heroes are invited to a dinner with the king of the realm. And the evil archmage is going to be there. And the mage is eager for anything that would cause the party to lose favor in the eyes of the king. And now the field of battle is table manners. Each role is critical. The evil mage will ask provocative questions. The party must answer politely. The use of the wrong fork is a mistake that might cost the party great advantage with the king. Imagine a whole session where all of the players are hushly debating which spoon should you use? Is there a salad? Is it a light salad or a heavy salad? Is it the soup? How rich is it? Shall I use the big spoon or the slightly bigger spoon?
I'll tell you what I'm thinking as you tell me all of this. How would I, as a GM or a player, ever know this stuff? In combat, I know what it's like running and jumping and swinging a sword because I've seen 1,000 movies and I can just imagine people running and jumping and swinging swords anyway. But how would I know what type of fork I should use and what I thought must never be lifted from the table at all? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. First, just like you can imagine and invent all sort of combat maneuvers, I slide down and hack with the sword of the legs, I can do the same here. You just need to have a large enough field for this. Have a lot of things on the table, have a lot of people around. And then you can say, well, I approach the prince and ask, you approach the prince? One must not approach the prince himself. There's also the butler next to him. You must speak to the butler first. And only after you get the approval by having the prince nod at you, only then can you talk to the prince. And if you have, like, for example, several courses instead of one course, you have enough space to have more things wrong, like someone eating the wrong course, for example, presenting, various types of food, and you reach for the chicken, but it's not chicken time. Finally, and I think it's even easier, just go to Wikipedia and read about it. There are so many real-world mannerisms and stuff you can read in Wikipedia, and it's really easy to find some. You just look for dinner table mannerism and see what type of things happened around the world during history and just copy like crazy from that.
Or simply be sad that you grew up in a backwater country, whatever it may be, and you were never taught the proper table manners, of course. There's a great example in Dresden Files where, for example, they have a duel, and the rules of the duel are simply taken from 17th century duel rules of whatever, because the author didn't have the time or whatever to make up a whole new set of dueling rules.
And you shouldn't. If it worked for whoever it was in the 17th century, it can work for you in the game.
Of course, and even you can go further. You can tell them, okay, listen, you're invited to, but in the next session, you're going to have a dinner with the king. The dining set would be China, and it would be in the style of Prussian Empire. Go and read up on that in Wikipedia for the next session. That's totally fun. If I would do that, I would get every course to be a round of combat. In every round, you would roll the initiative, and if you have the initiative, you can perform some sort of action to try and get the other side to do something impolite, like asking a provocative question, like saying, oh, that's a great chicken, when it's not the chicken yet, and get them to pick up the wrong fork, etc. Now, likewise, any skill can be turned into the proverbial battlefield. A game of tennis with the ambassador. Maybe there is even some bet riding on the outcome. Imagine you go to talk with the ambassador and ask him, well, I really need to know who kidnapped the princess. And he said, okay, why don't we have a game of tennis? And if you win, I shall tell you all I know.
I don't think you even need to go there. I mean, it might be enough that the GM tells the players, well, the king really doesn't care about you at all, but he really appreciates people who win at tennis. And then the players can decide to go ahead and do this tournament or whatever to prove themselves to be someone that is worthy of whatever.
Which is something that happens a lot with combat. Remember, many campaigns which I play, there's a fair and there's a jousting arena or single combat, and you do those things which are combat in order to win a proverbial different battlefield of honor or whatever. Why not go with other skills? And here we move on to metaphorical combat. Now, we've mentioned before a game that we both played, that Eran ran, where we played a tower defense game as a metaphor for evil taking over a character's soul. And you can take this idea and expand it on and on and on. metaphorical combat, have two different approaches or opinion inside the character's mind and have them fight each other. Other metaphorical combat could be fighting the dragon of despair, escaping the swamps of sadness, or managing to climb the wall of disappointments.
Aww.
In order to, in order to get that second win for your character, in order to make that good and righteous decision, in order for making a grand choice, but having it metaphorically presented as a battle of two concepts or ideas. Now, I would argue that making a choice can be a great conflict. Simply choosing between two alternatives when there are distinct advantages and disadvantages to each choice. This can be as simple as choosing between two henchmen with very useful skills for the party, but who refuse to work together, or to select on what quest to go on, the one offered to the party by the Blue Count or by the Green Viscount. Who knows? Now, both of those choices have good advantages and disadvantages, and making that choice might lead to a conflict within the party, a discussion, if you will, about what should we do and how. And I believe that these kind of moments are a great opportunity for a conflict that breeds excitement and create an actual lifelike characters. Because you take the time to have those conflicts rather than move on and settle them using your blade, spell, or whatever. And the last item on my list, one of my favorite conflicts of all, is the internal conflict. I think one of the best ways to develop any character is to place it in an internal conflict. Simply place two paths in front of that character. One which is easy, but requires some form of compromise, perhaps a moral one, and another path which is much harder, but is just according to what that character believes. There is a wonderful thing in Zen archery, which goes, fundamentally, the marksman aim at himself. And I think that's beautiful because you don't really need anyone else for a conflict. In order to fire an arrow into a target, you don't need anyone else. Basically, the challenge is you against yourself. Will I make it? It's not like that target is attacking you. You simply work against yourself. You're trying to better yourself to reach a higher level. And likewise, you don't need anyone else to create an internal conflict. Now, some of the best scenes are simply one man or one character having an internal conflict with themselves. If you would think of Hamlet, for example, the whole bloody play is simply about one person being really angry at himself, at his being unable to do what he perceives as the right thing to do, to avenge the death of his father, to go against the kingdom around him, and to actually get off his ass and do something. And that is exciting because watching someone going through an internal conflict and trying to reach some resolution, trying to arrive to some form of inner peace with their own demon, be them figurative, metaphorical, or literal demon possessing him, can be a wonderful, wonderful experience to any character or any player in your party.
Now, we had some episode in which we talked about character development and personal plot lines, etc. So we'll give links to all of those in the show notes if you want to maybe listen to more about this specific thing, internal conflicts, which are, I think, great. But now that we've discussed several types of conflict that are not necessarily fighty, combat, there's something really important that I want to add, and that's the importance of mechanics. Because any type of thing that is happening in-game, in order for it to be significant, for us to feel that it is real, I'm doing air quotes, of course, it must have mechanics. It must have some rules attached to it, because otherwise it's all make-believe. and the GM can change their mind, and then it's just, out of the window and nothing mattered. So if we're sitting around a table and we're doing a social conflict with the forks and the king and everything that we discussed before, unless there are some rules, some guidelines for us to use, the players might not see this as conflict, but rather as a sort of simply frustrating scene in which things happen to them and they have no control over it, and they don't really understand why or what. So the main thing that one should use in a conflict is a measure of success. I'm calling it a ladder because it's some sort of variable that can go up or down, how close you are to winning, or a resolution. Winning is one option. It doesn't have to be the only one. And it's a concept that I first saw on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 3rd edition, where they suggested using a sort of advancement tracker for various things. Like, for example, running away from the orcs. You have 2 advancement trackers. How close you are to the exit, how close the orcs are to catch you up. They are both on the same track, 2 different tokens. There was another amazing one used in The Enemy Within called Oh, What a Beautiful Morning, which was a social, not exactly conflict, but sort of scene in which the players were invited as caretakers in a brunch with nobles, and they had to make sure that everyone is having fun and that everything is polite and appropriate. In both cases, we use advancement trackers. But even more importantly, we used mechanics that allow the player to change these advancement trackers. They knew at least some of the options before them. It should be noted that this ladder, this advancement tracker, is in front of the players. Just like a player know how many enemies are still alive in combat, just like they know how much HP they themselves have, so should they know how close they are to finishing this scene in a successful manner.
Completely agree. I think transparency and understanding the mechanics of something that's happening in the game is exactly the thing that give you a sense of control, of agency, of the ability to make smart choices for your character in a way that would symbolize their understanding, the character's understanding of the world around them.
Another example is from Savage Worlds, which have chase rules. Savage Worlds is a system all about action scenes and pulp action, stuff like that. So, of course, it will have some chase rules. It also have, by the way, social conflict rules, but they are very weak compared to the chase, which has all sorts of things you can do and cards that you draw and rolls that you do, etc., maneuvers you can choose. And the chase rolls are pretty good. I hope that next edition they'll be better, because they can be better. But they're also used, for example, for overcoming a storm. When you're in a boat and you try to outrun the storm, or even just surviving the storm, you use the chase rules with a variation. And that's pretty awesome. So what are the mechanical things that you need to actually have in order for all of this thing, in order for this scene to feel crunchy? First, you must be able to provide interesting choices. So if the only thing the fighter can do is roll diplomacy and hope they get a high result, that's not an interesting choice. That's barely a choice. That's just what they do. But how about you give them 2 maneuvering options, only instead of maneuvering, we'll call it changing the topic or having a different approach. Are you going to try and flatter the prince? Therefore, you might be able to roll knowledge, nobility, or whatever to see what sort of things you know that can be used in order to flatter him instead of diplomacy. Are you going to try and bluff and tell how amazing you were in whatever imaginary combat that you are now describing? So you'll seem like you're an amazing sort of person that everyone should know, and the prince is lucky to have you. You'll of course roll bluff, etc. Most players will recognize this and go for it themselves, but they might not be so aware in every situation, especially in some of the stranger types of conflicts that Uri mentioned before. You must make sure that everyone is aware that there are options and what they are, even if vaguely, even if enough to allow them to now invent new stuff, new types of approaches. And the second thing that's really important is timing. Because if I don't know how long it will take me to succeed, how many times do I need to do this in order to succeed, then I am stuck. I just have nothing going on around me. I can keep doing this, but am I waiting for something? Where's the tension? Where's the affirmation that I'm actually advancing towards something? Of course, if you have what we suggested before, a ladder, sort of advancement tracker, everyone can see where we are compared to the ending. But, and this is very useful, having a tracker for time is even better because that's something you fight against. Everyone fights against time, Uri. Whatever type of conflict it is that you're now going through.
We fight against time and time again.
Mistborn, as we've mentioned before, does this timing thing surprisingly well because they invented a concept called a beat. Again, I'll discuss this in the review, but I'll just give a short example now. A beat is the amount of time that is required in order to do something significant in the conflict. That's how it's basically defined. And that means that if our current conflict is combat, it might be a few seconds. But if our current conflict is running for mayor, then each beat might be several weeks during which we are campaigning and trying to spread rumors about our rivals and trying to...
Or go with a positive campaign emphasizing our ideology and what we will do for the people of this town, Iran. It doesn't have to be a conflict.
That's completely true. So this is amazing, the beat thing, because it allows everyone to understand how conflict works, whatever the conflict is, because all conflicts use bits. And we will roll initiative in whatever conflict it is. And this is, I think, the most important thing, and I'll give some example from the book. Every type of conflict has damage and circumstances. Mistborn recognizes three types of conflicts: physical, social, and mental, which you would see will correspond to basically everything you've just described. And in each of them, you have a list of possible damage and possible circumstances. Types of damage in physical combat, of course, can be stuff like breaking an arm, having a wound infected, getting scarred, all sorts of things. I should note that in Mistborn, damage is very similar to damage in Fate. It comes as a sort of an aspect, a few words that are now true about your character. Circumstances in combat are, again, quite obvious. I have friend flanking the target, etc., etc. In social conflicts, types of damage can be, as you've mentioned before, you can become embarrassed. You can have some turmoil among your allies and between you. You can become humiliated, publicly criticized. You can draw the attention of the authorities. And types of circumstances can be, for example, you have a very appealing stance. The approach you chose is something that works very well with the type of crowd you are talking to. You have proven yourself deceitful in the past, so no one trusts you right now. These are very, of course, negative circumstances. Finally, mental conflict is not necessarily people using mental magic on you, although it can be. In the world of Mistborn, there is mental magic. It is also exactly what you said before, Uri, about internal conflict. Mm-hmm. And about, for example, losing your faith in whatever it is you're currently doing, or losing self-respect. These are things that might happen as a result of other conflicts, by the way. But then you are in a mental conflict against yourselves sometimes. And the type of damages that can happen out of it are like, for example, obsessions, hallucinations, doubt, compulsion, night terror, flashbacks, unnatural fascinations. And the circumstances can be like, for example, you take a lot of time. You are in a favorable environment. Like, for example, if you are trying to break someone and make them confess something, that's a mental conflict. And a favorable environment for this will obviously be the cellar of the police station.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I love the fact that they codify things in a way which is not strict, but very easily explorable and easily used by players and GM alike.
What I like there, beside all of this, is that you also get the differences between types of conflicts. Yes, they all use the same basic concept. There are bits, there's damage, there's circumstances, and all of these interact mechanically in the same way in all of them. Like, for example, circumstances give you dice, damage becomes aspect, etc. But also, each of these has its own weapons. In conflict, in physical conflict, it's actual weapons, but in others, it's other types of items that can be helpful. And each of these has its own sub-rules that can be used to differentiate it from the others. And I really like it because they are different. Not every type of conflict is the same conflict. That's it, I believe. Or are you disagreeing with me, Uri?
I think if we take down the basic building block of mechanics to support this kind of interaction, I would say the three most important elements are: one, what is the time frame? I.e., what constitute a round or a bit or an action. Like we've mentioned, in a conversation, it could be a sentence. In a dinner, it could be a course. In an election, it could be a week or a news cycle. Number two is some measurable way of quantifying how much resources we, the character, are investing in doing whatever it is we do. And third and last is some measurable way of understanding the results of, did we succeed? By how much did we succeed? Was this a grand success or a total failure? In order to get some kind of feedback that would let us see or imagine the effect that it had inside the game world.
Excellent. I don't think there's anything else to add, but if you guys at home are in disagreement with me, do send us an email to show@dwarfcast.net and tell us about systems that you know that deal with non-combat conflicts in interesting ways. First of all, because both Uri and I are always looking for such systems, for such mechanics. A lot of the time they can be used in other systems. I can import them into whatever game I am playing. And because we can then tell everyone at home and they'll know as well. But now it's time to take the load off.
Woohoo!
This is the part of the show in which we discuss role-playing games in our personal lives. Uri, what has been happening with you?
Well, I must say that the inspiration for recording this episode came from my last gaming session, where I'm running my campaign, which is sort of a Dresden Files-esque Fate accelerated game. This is our 6th season, and we wanted something more light and fun and action oriented, so we do kind of monster of the week sessions. And in our last session, the party is tracking down a satyr, a faun, who came from the Never Never, the land of fairies, into this place, and they track him down to a comedy club. And they go inside, and this mythical being is standing and doing stand-up. And there's a bunch of people in the crowd laughing, etc. And the party is thinking, how can we get this character, this supernatural being, to leave this world and go back to his home? And he, from the stage, beckoned them and suggests that they will have a fight-off in the comedy club with stand-up. So basically, there was a duel of jokes between the party and this creature, and of course, only one side could win. And I simply love that, because I have great players who are quick on their feet and really always fun to take a challenge. And I had weeks. I had weeks to collect little jokes and, transform them to be in-game and to relate to the world and the setting that we're playing in. And they simply, put their heads together and started heckling him and doing all sorts of funny joke about the fact that he's half goat, or, is that a cucumber in your pants? Oh, wait, you don't have pants because you're a half goat creature. Oh, that's sad. And I really love the fact that we've managed to have a really intense conflict, which with them realizing toward the end that if he wins, the crowd's gonna laugh themselves to death. That's how we kill people. And they have to outwit him and be funnier so that the crowd would laugh from their joke that don't have the magical enhancement that would cause the death of the audience.
This is great.
Yeah, I enjoy it tremendously. It's such a fun way of trying to take joke and, placing them inside your setting. Loads of fun. I recommend to everyone to do that.
I did not have a game of my regular group. Instead, we played a one-timer at the house and home of one Bill Roper, who is very well known thanks to Happy Jack's RPG, and also if you've ever played Warcraft, a lot of it is thanks to him. Go to Wikipedia and check out his page. And Bill Roper really likes Grimm, which is by Fantasy Flight Games, and is based on a previous game that they did that was called Grimm, that was for D20. The new Grimm, well, it's not that new, it's like 10 years old, but the standalone Grimm is a game all about kids being drawn into the world of Grimm fairy tales. And they are still kids, and they have to try to get out, and it's really bloody mess what is going on inside them. Well, Bill prefers a less bloody mess version of it, but still pretty weird because it's an imaginary sort of crazy world. And we played the kids. And it was a lot of fun. Now, I have some thoughts about the systems. We haven't used it completely, so I will not give a full review. But generally speaking, the system is pretty good. I really like the name of the skills. It's an important part of any system. Like, for example, there are playground skills, which are the main physical things that you do, and they are called hide, seek, scamper. That's brilliant. That's exactly what kids would do. And it's really helped me get into the role. And I rarely play as a player. I'm almost always GM. And when I play, I usually do it for the story. I want to play through some narrative. I almost never do so in order to, become a character and act through a character and feel the sensation of being someone else. But this time I did. And it worked. And I had a lot of fun being a 10-year-old geek, specifically the slightly fat kid from the Goonies. That's the kid that I played as. And it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed being that person. And that's a feeling that I don't usually get. I rarely ever get. So thanks to Bill and thanks to Grimm and that's it. That's what I played.
That sounds like a week well spent.
Oh, it was just a weekend. The rest of the week, other things happened, non-RPG related. So they are not interesting. Guys, if you are at home and you're thinking to yourself, wait, but I think RPGs are interesting and I want to hear more about them, go to dwarfcast.net, where you can subscribe through any sort of podcatcher that you are currently using, where you can also rate us. And we would love you to do this. Even a like, even a star. Well, if you can give 5 stars, it would be better. If you're going to give 1, we would first like to know why, and maybe we can improve ourselves in some way. And if you want to inform us of how we can improve ourselves, or also of any other thing that you want us to maybe cover, any topic or any system, do send an email to show@dwarfcast.net or check us on Facebook, where we have a page and a group on the Shadows of Dwarves, and on Twitter @dwarfpodcasts.
And we traditionally end the podcast by everyone saying goodbye in their own native tongue. 3, 2, 1. Later.
On the Shoulder of Dwarves is shared under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial 4. The intro and outro are taken from Silly Fun by Kevin MacLeod. Licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3. Find us at dwarfcast.net and follow us on Twitter or Facebook.